Hello and welcome to the Let's Get Mental podcast. I'm your host, Archie, and today is joining me Tim,
Hello.
Jack,
Hello.
and Hanniya.
Hi.
So today's podcast topic is going to be in and out of lockdown. We're obviously going to be sharing our opinions about lockdown for us and obviously to do with mental health as well. So our first something I want to get out of the way first is obviously the time of recording this. We are actually recording this on the 14th of September, so we're not recording this in lockdown. We're in that sort of state now where we've come out of lockdown, depending on when you're watching this. Obviously, there has been new regulations that have come in on the Monday today, which is where the R number is going to cost one. You can only meet up with 6 people outside your household, but of course that's still not completely clear to everybody. But I think the first thing that actually I want to ask to everybody here first, and I'm going to come to you, Tim, first specifically, because obviously you haven't actually been in lockdown. You've obviously been doing some work. So
Yes.
I want to ask, how has lockdown been for you, especially because you've obviously been working during it?
It's been very interesting because I've literally watched society stop in front of me, and I remember the morning after the heavier restrictions were announced on March the 24th. Driving to work, and I did not pass another car for at least 7 to 8 miles. It was really weird, and I didn't know if I was going to be sent home as well. I was just told, okay, go into work, we're going to have a briefing. Because government was quite vague. They didn't ask us to shut down, but in the end, government said, no, you need to continue because, well, we're an essential business because I work on generators for a living. And of course, a few weeks later, we'd be working on generators which would be going down to the Nightingale Hospital in London. So I was doing so much overtime to literally get these units out the door because I was now I was now propelled into the front line of the fight against COVID. Because a lot of the machines I also work on go into these testing stations, and each testing station has its own welfare unit and it has its own generator, so it doesn't share a supply, so it's reliable. It's not going to be brought down by anything else. So it's been very interesting because at the start of the pandemic, I looked at what was going on in China and thought, oh dear, can't see us getting involved. I went from that to suddenly onto the front line. So it's been a very interesting time. But I'm glad I've not been stuck at home. I'm glad I've been able to go to work. And also just keeps me in a routine. So
I think that's definitely, obviously you've been keeping your obviously mind working and doing something. I mean, I imagine that at work as well. Obviously, did you find there was obviously regulations coming in, obviously about sanitizing? Did you find that everybody was following it at your work?
Yeah, everyone's following it. There's more hand sanitizer as well. There's hand sanitizing stations. We're encouraged to clean more. The cleaning regimes have been stepped up anyway. I think everyone's pulled their weight.
So I'm going to come to Hanniya now. How has lockdown been for you in general?
So my situation was quite different to Tim. So before lockdown, I was in my final year of A levels, due to say A levels, and then we went into lockdown, schools closed, exams got cancelled, and I went from having 3 A levels to revise for to then suddenly having nothing at all, because exams had been cancelled. And I think what Tim said about having that routine, that's something that was kind of fundamental for me in lockdown as well. So again, it was quite different. So I didn't have like anywhere to go to as such, or any even like deadlines to meet, or anything like that. But having like a set time to wake up and making like I still like I'm really big on like making to-do lists and things. So I tried to continue that in some way, even if it was just like really simple things like, I don't know, call this friend or, do this or do that, personal projects or whatever. I think keeping some kind of routine for me was what kept me sane in a way.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Yeah, no, that makes. Is there anything that you did in lockdown that was new? Any, did you try anything new, like any hobbies that you started, or did you just, go about your normal business but try to do it at home?
Yeah. So for me, I did try to pick up hobbies and things like that I didn't have as much time for. So I'm quite into sketching and things. So I try to like do more of that. I picked up the guitar. So before lockdown, I had one lying around. for about 3 years, and I just never really properly played it. And then in lockdown, I kind of through YouTube taught myself a bit, bought a new one actually as well. So yeah, I've tried to keep myself busy in as many ways as I could.
No, well, that's obviously really important. I myself have tried to do a few more different things in lockdown, but I've always been a sort of person who quite enjoys my own company. Not saying I don't enjoy the company of others, but I felt like I've been able to deal with lockdown. Actually, so far on my own, I quite like just being being on my own, doing my own thing, really. And so
And
far, sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, what's interesting is that's something that I've sort of discovered because of lockdown as well. Because prior to that, I'd say I was probably a bit of the opposite. So I sort of loved sort of meeting up with friends, and I still do. And I'm quite like I consider myself a more people type person. I enjoy being with other people. But in lockdown, I did sort of discover that element of myself, and spending time with yourself and um, having fun with that doesn't involve speaking with or being with other people, if that makes sense. So that's something that I sort of feel like a positive that I got out of lockdown, actually. Yeah.
No, I'm really glad to hear that. Jack, how's lockdown been for you?
Well, during the peak of lockdown, a few months ago now, actually, I was actually I was actually getting through my master's degree in clinical psychology. So, like Hanniya, I was actually in education, but it was very difficult at the time because I remember for my dissertation this year, especially, we had minimal guidance whatsoever because last year, before in my third year undergraduate, we had plenty of tutor support. We had meetings with peer graduate friends that we could collaborate on our projects and whatnot. But this year we didn't get any of that, and we were also promised additional support online, but it actually turned out that many of those sessions were cancelled or the lecturers didn't turn up. So it was complete chaos. But I think it was a real test of our own grit and kind of like tenacity as students, because it really pushed us to commit to our work and our assignments, because our work wasn't cancelled and we had to carry on with all of our assessments. We didn't have any exams, but we had assignments, coursework, dissertations to complete with completely no guidance now from our would-be tutors.
I think definitely if you were doing education before lockdown and obviously it then transitioned to lockdown, it's been one of the hardest things, because I think it's never well, as I say, the pandemic and everything about it, it's never been really experienced before by any country or anywhere. So I can understand why that's been extremely hard, for you especially. Has there been anything though that you've picked up, during lockdown, any sort of hobbies or anything that you've sort of started, to keep yourself entertained?
Yes, actually. I found that naturally I had to keep myself kind of like busy, keep my hands working, especially when I actually completed my course. I found a lot of time in my hands, and usually I would have used that time to meet up with friends and family and whatnot. But since I couldn't do that, I decided to get involved in painting, because I find that really relaxing. So I'd sketch as well, like Hanniya did, but also I'd get involved in some painting. And also I'd started developing a workout routine, since we weren't allowed to go outside at one point. I only want one walk a day.
Oh yeah.
So personally, I wanted to be more active, so I developed my own workout routine after doing a bit of research, ordered myself some weights, and that kept me occupied too.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, for me, especially, fitness has been one of the hardest things that hit me during lockdown, because I was so in a routine of going to the gym. So when that was taken away from me, I felt I felt like obviously a part of my life had been taken away. But at the same time, I'm fortunate enough to sort of know, how to do workouts and stuff. So I was able to keep myself active and still keep myself, my sanity going, my physical health during lockdown. But I mean, we're going to move on to now, a little bit of a controversial subject, and is, how we feel the pandemic has been dealt with. And I'm going to come to Tim first, and I know Tim's probably raring to go on this subject.
How did you know?
How do you think the pandemic has been dealt with?
It's not been dealt with at all from my perspective. It's been, in short, it's been badly managed, and I put that in big air quotes, from the start, really. You say the economy has obviously taken a hit. That was to be expected anyway, but I don't think the current cabinet has helped the situation. But more so, what's more tragic though is the human cost of all this. It's really quite sad, to have 41,000 people perish. That is a lot of people,
Yeah, I can.
and
Sorry, carry on.
all those deaths could have been avoided, really.
I think what sorry, just wanted to say myself. I think what annoys me is obviously that it's almost like, oh, as I say, the day of recording this, obviously we are having restrictions coming back in, but it seems like almost a lot of people have sort of forgotten, the sort of area that we were in. Then obviously the doctors and nurses that were putting their lives on the line to obviously help people during, who were obviously had COVID. And it seems like now, most people are sort of forgetting that and just going back to their normal lives.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in my town, a lot of people think the pandemic's over.
Yeah, I'm sure a
Unfortunately,
lot of people are like
in fact, in July, I had to actually tell someone in the street, keep your distance, please. It's very rare. It's very rare I get irritated and snap at people. But I said to this bloke, I said, "Can you keep your distance, please?"
that.
And then he just started throwing verbal abuse at me, and then said, "No," I said back to him, sorry. I said, "There's a pandemic still on," and he said, "No, there isn't." And at this point, my eyes nearly rolled out of my head. Like, for goodness sake, do you not
Sorry,
do?
Goodness.
Yeah, I mean, and it's about this point I kind of lost all faith in humanity.
Well, I think, well, maybe not all faith, I hope,
Not
I'm
all
sure
faith, but a lot of it anyway. So
I think though obviously one thing that I think we can compare to is the UK to other countries. And I have a friend who actually lives in Switzerland. And it's very interesting hearing his perspective on how lockdown and how it's been, sort of handled there. And obviously there are similar things that have happened to him, like the face masks and obviously social distancing. But it seems like that country, particularly Switzerland, came out of lockdown a little bit earlier. They started getting up their businesses again, and obviously trying to stabilize the economy. But I guess the question is it, are people getting COVID because we're not following the restrictions, or is it other reasons? But I'm going to come to Hanniya now and just ask, do you think the pandemic has been dealt with in a reasonable manner, or do you think it's been handled as Tim says it hasn't been?
Um, okay, so I live in an area that had a longer lockdown than most parts. So I live in Leicester, and our lockdown, as you probably know, it was elongated for quite a while, and I feel like a lot of the communication around that wasn't the best either. And that's putting it nicely. Like, it was horrible. So, for example, I remember it was Eid, the weekend before Eid, and we were all sort of thinking, so there was some sort of speculation whether the lockdown would be lifted or not, and we were all sort of kind of provisionally planning to have like my family over that we hadn't seen for like, I think it was like 4 or 5 months at the time. And there was a lot of speculation, like, is it going to be lifted, is it not? We were told that there would be an announcement on like 5 o'clock on that, I think it was a Thursday. um and then it got like delayed and delayed and delayed, and eventually we got an announcement at 11 p.m. the night before, like 2 days before Eid, saying that lockdown would be continued till the Monday after. So that obviously upset a lot of plans. And I think just the communication around it in general hasn't been great, which has led to, like, people not taking it seriously, or like this current rise in cases as well. And then another strand of that is also like, something that we mentioned earlier with regards to education and just young people in general, and how young people have been affected by the pandemic. So for example, with like closing school, opening schools again, and all of that, there's been a lot of speculation and controversy, and there still is. But I feel like young people just haven't been included in the conversation. Even with the Prime Minister's like question times, there was no like scope for under 18s to ask questions, even when it was about things like education, which concern them the most. So I feel like we are nowhere near like the top of the list for like the countries that handled it well. Um, there's definitely a lot that could have been done differently. And even now, it's not like we're not out of the woods yet. So there's still, I don't want to say there's time to turn it around, but there's still time for the government to sort of improve their handling of it. But so far, it's not been great.
I think one point that you say there about communication is definitely something that I can agree with. I think that's been the biggest one. I think it's never been really clear from the start, and I think that's where one of the biggest downfalls, obviously, because the communication is. I mean, they've tried to make it clear with these slogans, but when it comes to the actual rules, that's where obviously it's become very hard to read. So, Jack, your opinion, the pandemic, how do you think that's been handled?
Well, I think it depends which sector you're talking about, because personally, I think that the nurses, especially, and hospital staff have done an amazing job at dealing with this pandemic on the front lines, because they've been faced with this challenge that's just come out of nowhere, really. It's this huge spike of cases and hospital beds, at least for a month or two. And they handled it really well, judging by experience in the news and whatnot. And also, they had to rapidly order PPE equipment. Like all sorts of employment actually had to order a variety of PPE equipment and learn how to adapt to that. And I feel like that has been implemented really well into the workplace. And on the whole, employers have been utilizing PPE and social distancing measures really well. However, I feel that the government, especially, and the media, I feel that they have not been handling it so well. The media, because I feel like they've been actually exploiting this pandemic for their own gain. I feel like they've been causing a lot of paranoia and fear when reporting all kinds of stories, even if they have minimal evidence. And the government, I feel like they've been, especially recently, the whole reason for these new restrictions was because, according to the government, it was young people who were at fault, despite the government encouraging young people to spend more time out in restaurants, socializing, even introducing a discount scheme at restaurants and whatnot. I just feel like it's not only young people that are at fault. Like, yes, I have seen a lot of young people that have not been adhering to the rules, mind you. Like, I've seen young people that have been gathering in groups of like higher groups than permitted, let's say, during lockdown. But that being said, I've also seen, especially, multiple people amongst the elderly generation who have not been wearing face masks, face coverings in shops, who've been refusing to without any medical reason, and who've even not been social distancing, and who've literally just been chatting in a store close to one another, close to strangers, without any regard for social distancing.
I think, I think definitely what you're getting there is about, like, I think everybody has a part to blame in this. I don't think I can doubt that. I think one thing I will say, though, is I think we could have been in a lot of a worse situation that we are right now. I mean, I always think back to, around January, obviously, when the whole idea of a hung parliament was happening. It does make me feel, obviously, of what, it could have happened if we had a hung parliament during, the whole lockdown and the coronavirus. But obviously this podcast is obviously to do with mental health at the whole part of it. So we're going to move on now to, obviously, lockdown and mental health. Obviously, and feel free to not share any experience you've had, or feel free to share experiences. But has anyone obviously here? I'll come to Tim first. Obviously, ask you. Has it affected you whilst working? But mental health, has that been anything for you during?
Kind of. I mean, it was great that I could still continue to work. Although it was very interesting hearing on the radio at work the stay-at-home messages, and I talk back to the radio. I can't stay at home. I can't. I can't bring a generator home and work on it. I have to be here. But it's not significantly affected my mental health. But one thing that was quite disconcerting was, seeing society stop in front of me. Like, for example, I'm massively into outside of work. I'm massively into transport. I like traveling places, and of course, it was frustrating that I couldn't travel to places, because literally just a few weeks before the restrictions were announced, I spent a weekend in Manchester. Great city, 11 out of 10. I thoroughly recommend it. It's a great place in the north. But like, for example, I look up in the sky and there are no aircraft present, which was so strange. It is as if we've gone back 100 or so years. It was really, really strange. And another thing as well is that after work, I'd usually go out to have a coffee with a few mates of mine locally, and of course couldn't do that. So yeah, I did feel restricted and constrained, but it didn't. I didn't feel any isolation or anxiety. I was just quite frustrated, really. But I knew why it was all happening, but it doesn't really help the frustration and also feeling disconcerted.
Well, just to say, it sounds to me obviously that you've been quite resilient throughout lockdown, and obviously especially while working. I don't think a lot of people could have definitely worked during lockdown, but then on the flip side, I'm sure a lot of people would have preferred to work during lockdown. Hanniya, I'm obviously feel free to share what you would like to hear, but has your mental health been affected at all by lockdown?
I'd say mine has kind of had the opposite effect. So I know personally as well, a lot of people have had like quite a negative, like quite a blow to their mental health during lockdown. I feel like in a way mine has kind of gotten a bit better in comparison to before. So as I mentioned before, I was preparing for A levels and it was just a really, really stressful time. And again, I was under a lot of pressure and stress, with the build up to exams. So in a way, it's been quite nice. At least like the first half before I got a bit bored. Just to spend time doing things that I didn't have time for before, and spending time with my family and things like that. So in that way, I feel like it was quite nice. But then there's like the whole other sort of element of anxiety with regards to like education and what's going to happen next and results day, and of course that's a whole other podcast. But I feel like overall it's been better than what I'd anticipated, but there were like elements of both positive and negative mental health during lockdown for me.
I think one thing that I'm assuming, I think this is what I'm understanding, is that it's almost like your mental health was more affected by the sort of education side of it than the lockdown itself. I think you were saying obviously that you weren't able to have your family come over, but I think like you were saying, it seemed to be more the pressure of A levels that was getting to you a little bit more.
So lockdown almost provided me with that sort of break, with like, suddenly all that pressure was removed and giving me that chance to really take time for myself. So in that sense, it kind of helped.
I'm going to come to Jack now. Lockdown for you, how's that been in terms of obviously to do with mental health?
Well, I feel like my mental health has definitely been affected because usually to wind down isn't to like de-stress from my own kind of like mental health problems. I usually spend time around my friends, and I find that's the biggest factor in both kind of like maintaining like a happy balance for me and also recovering from mental health. So the fact that I wasn't able to spend time socializing with my friends because of lockdown, it definitely resulted in my anxiety and depression rising. And also, not only that, but I find that I like my routines as a person. And it was something completely new, completely unexpected, completely different, completely unprecedented. And it completely disrupted kind of like all the routines that I had in my life. And so that was also quite anxiety provoking for me. And one final point that I can think of to do with my mental health being disrupted was the actual environment that I was confined to. Like, it was like, my home is very noisy. I have two little brothers, one who's 5, one who's 10. And obviously I like my own personal space. And because I was trapped in that house all the time, it was just quite overwhelming for me. And that kind of like resulted in my anxiety rising quite a bit as well, because I kind of like felt like I needed my own space, but I had nowhere to go.
Yeah, I can definitely understand where you're coming from. That I think for a lot of people, especially who have siblings who are of a younger age, I think for parents as well, being cooped up in a house for such a long period of time really, I think, affected a lot of people. And there's only so much TV that you can watch to the point of where you really get extremely bored and really sort of like, get, in a sense, get depressed and just low mood, thinking, when is this going to end? I mean, I think one thing that I want to obviously talk about very quickly is just about, I think, the people that almost had mental health issues and then have actually gone into lockdown with them, and it's only gotten worse. Obviously, anxiety is a definitely good one, but I think the lack of support that some people have had during lockdown has just been absolutely terrible. I don't know if anyone wants to obviously share any people that they might know that have had any situations like that, but I think, because of course the NHS has been focusing mainly on COVID during lockdown, and people who have had, I think mental health has sort of been not necessarily completely avoided, but sort of pushed to the side as a priority, and getting services out to people who need them. I mean, especially people who are, could be suicidal. They're definitely not going to be of getting the support they needed during lockdown. And I think this is actually going to bring me on to the next point, unless anyone else has anything to add on that. How to help, what people could have done to help themselves during lockdown. And I think from my point of view, I think what Hanniya was saying earlier about getting to a routine and sort of treating it like a work day, treating it like you're actually, trying to do something at home is definitely a way to, get yourself through lockdown. Obviously, we're not in lockdown anymore, but we will get onto the fact that we potentially could be going into a second one again. But is there anything that anyone has any ideas about? I mean, I'm going to come to Tim first again, but how people could have got through lockdown easier.
I'd say if you're not trapped, but if you're confined to your home and you have to work from home, whatever. The first thing that would help me, and this even helps at work, in the workplace, is make a list, like a physical list. Write down what you're going to do, and then tick it off once you've done it. Give yourself something, to do, and also, try and pick up new interests, or if you've got hobbies, existing ones, make them even better. For example, I'm really into photography, and if you're a photographer that's stuck in lockdown, improve your skills in the meantime, because that doesn't cost anything. So just keep yourself occupied as best you can. You've got lots of time on your hands, so make it as productive as possible, really.
I think that's definitely a good point about like making it productive. I think a lot of people, because I think for me especially, I think when lockdown first came in, I just thought like, oh, there's no point trying to commit to doing anything new, because I thought it was going to be over quite quickly. But obviously as the weeks went on, I started realizing, okay, they really are serious about this, in the sense that we are staying inside. Hanniya, any thoughts you'd like to share on any services that you might know that could help people who might be struggling obviously not in lockdown right now, once again just saying, but if we do go back into a lockdown, any ideas about that, what could help people?
Yeah, so firstly, just to touch on services, so another group that I'm involved in is the Young People's Council, and we were doing a lot of work to again promote services and ways for young people to sort of help themselves during lockdown, to not slip down the path of bad mental health and things. And one service, Pat Health. And I think that is specifically for young people, but you can go on the Health for Teens website and put in your area, and there should be a number for each area that you can text. So if you have any concerns with regards to mental health and physical health, you can just sort of text that number, and there's like nurses who are on there from a certain time every day who can give you advice on there. So that's sort of, just when you said service, that's the first that sort of came to mind for me. And then on the note of things that can help, I'd say one of my points would be to make use of technology. And I know that since lockdown started, things like Zoom meetings and Teams and things like that, people started using them a lot more, taking notice a lot more. And I'd say just use that to your advantage. So like Jack was saying, if you're someone who likes meeting up with friends and who thrives in that, do the next best thing, and I don't know, hold like a Zoom virtual catch up. and just small things like that can really make a big difference, and that's something that I found as well. Um, and then another thing I want to also touch on is not to put pressure on yourself, because I know that all throughout lockdown, especially like a lot of us are going to be on social media more, and you see all of this like amazing things, all of these amazing things that everyone is doing, and someone's like learned a new hobby, and someone's learned how to cook and bake like a elaborate cake, or I don't know, things like that.
Yeah.
And that is great, and if that's something that you should do if you can, and if you feel up for it. But then at the same time, don't put too much pressure on yourself, and don't feel like, oh, so and so's done this, and I've just watched Netflix all day. Don't make that like make you feel worse about yourself, and just sort of take each day as it comes, and like don't force yourself to a certain standard of productivity, I guess.
I really like that, because I think that is kind of a sort of pressure that sort of come with lockdown, is that now suddenly you've got to do something new, you've got to pick up something, you've got to improve yourself during lockdown. I think for a lot of people, that's not quite a fair sort of pressure to put onto people, and I think especially people who are obviously worried about their jobs or their exams or education. The last thing they want to do is obviously think about that. And I like you say, whilst I think Zoom and all these these sort of online services have helped people connect more, at the same time, I think it has, I think it's not good to always be online and sort of check up what everyone else is doing, simply because, I say, it might get you down on what you could be missing out on. So, Jack, any words from you that you'd like to give on, obviously, getting, for people getting through lockdown, or anything that you might know that could help people who might be struggling with their mental health?
Like Hanniya said, I think it is important to endorse your friendships online if you're that kind of person, like I know I am, that thrives in kind of like spending time with friends, and in that being your kind of like center of happiness. But at the same time, if you are using technology a lot more, like if you are especially scrolling through socials a lot more, it's important to note that you have to remember that people usually post on social media the best about their lives, like the best that might have gone on. Like, they don't post things that probably like are more realistic at the time or accurate. But social media platforms act as an idealistic platform of you, kind of like the best version of you, like I'd say. So I think that it's important to not put too much pressure on yourself if you think, oh, they look really happy, or they look really good, or they're kind of like doing all this today, like they've done this amazing painting. I think it's important to know that it's important to stress to yourself that you shouldn't be too hard on yourself if you feel like you haven't been as productive, and you should cut yourself some slack, really, because personally as well, I've actually had to distance myself from a number of people on my social media that have kind of like been posting about being constantly productive, and who've been saying, oh, it's not okay to stop during lockdown, because I think that it's important to realize that you need to breathe during lockdown. And I think that even now, like coming out of it, it's important to realize that you might be out of practice considering like what you might have done before, and you need to give yourself a breather to get back to the same kind of standards that you were at before.
So, no, I'm glad that we've all shared these points, and obviously trying to help, especially young people. I think a lot of those points definitely refer to a lot of young people. But as I say, I obviously, there's other people, there's adults as well who have been struggling in lockdown, as well as parents. I imagine parents have been having a very hard time. I know definitely some parents who've been very struggling with their kids, simply because one of them has asthma, and they don't know whether to obviously send them to school or to keep them at home. It's as I say, and it's one of these things, as I say, and when you look to the government obviously for advice on these things, they're not always the best to tell you these things. So I'm going to come around to everyone again, and this is another question I've been wanting to ask. But now that we're out of lockdown, do you feel like everything's sort of obviously I know, because of the date, we are having new restrictions coming in, but I will get to that. But do you feel like things are starting to ease a little bit easy now? Do you feel like things aren't as stressful, or do you feel like lockdown was quite a big thing to deal with, and even though we're easing out of it now, still things are in quite a stressful situation. I'm going to come to Tim once again for this one. Your opinion on that?
Yeah, we're still in a very difficult situation, but we all still need to pull our weight, and everyone needs to take part in preventing the spread of COVID-19. Obviously, it's been, obviously earlier in the year, it's very, very difficult. Although I do think it was, looking back, it was perhaps a necessary step. Although I would argue that calling this a bit of a new normal is a little bit naive, in my opinion, because it's not exactly normal to to wear a face covering in a shop. It's it's only a temporary measure. It's just really strange times we're living in, and it's all taken us by surprise, because many people have believed, myself included, that the risk of a pandemic was incredibly low. I think the last pandemic was actually 100 years ago, which was the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918 to 1920.
Not the plague.
Not the plague. No, that was when was that? Is that 1500s or 40? I don't know.
A long time ago.
For me, history starts in the 1800s, because that's when things got interesting, in my opinion. The era Britain got moving. Thank God for the steam engine. Anyway,
Sorry, carry on.
No, it's all right.
I was just going to say, well, I think we're obviously not in that dire situation of a pandemic, but Hanniya, do you think we are in a sort of a new normal now? Do you think since we're not actually in lockdown anymore, do you reckon this is what has become the new norm for us now, sort of wearing face masks now for a long time and social distancing, and we're going to be going in and out of these restrictions that the government tells us?
I think to a large degree, yes, at least for the foreseeable future. And most definitely, at least till we have a vaccine or some kind of more permanent cure. Because personally, I feel like the numbers will dip and rise and dip and rise again as we, open and close lockdown. And in terms of face masks, again, even if there is a more permanent solution, I think after the world has kind of been shaken, and even after this is like in the past, people are going to want that peace of mind, at least for a few years. So personally, I do think that face masks and some of these regulations are here to stay. I hope that, the lockdown, at least like in all of its severity, is not normal ever, because that, as Tim was saying, the world was at a standstill. But I think that there are elements that will be continued, and like, without trying to be dramatic, like the world post-pandemic will not be the same at all. So I think if not where we're at right now, this might not be the new normal, but I feel like we will have a new normal in comparison to where we were at before this pandemic.
Yeah, no, I can definitely understand that. Tim, was there something you wanted to say as well?
Yeah, it was just about I think only things will return to normal-ish when a vaccine is found. But I just want to make this point, and I'm sure there's scientists working on the vaccine probably aware of this. Like how the Second World War vastly improved aircraft technology, I hope that this pandemic vastly improves vaccine technology to the point where we can both develop, trial, and then manufacture vaccines within months, because a lot of the time with a vaccine it takes decades of development. So that's all I wanted to say, really.
No, that's a good point. I can understand. I think vaccine technology will improve, but obviously the thing that made the COVID-19 obviously being the one that actually was caused as much devastation as it has is simply because nobody had it before. Obviously, I'm not going to get into the details about where it came from or anything like that. But I'm going to come to Jack now. Do you think this is the new normal that we're living in now? These restrictions changing every now and then from the government.
Well, I think some of these restrictions, as Hanniya said, are here to stay. Like the face coverings, I think they'll be around for at least another year or two, in my opinion. And the social distance measures as well, I think they're also here to stay. But I do think that these rules are pretty dynamic. That this rule of 6, I think this will be subject to change one way or another. And personally, I think that more restrictions are going to be reintroduced, because I don't see this rule of six working, in my opinion, because I think that right now the biggest vector of COVID-19 are schools. And I think that school children are definitely in a vulnerable place to carry this disease, because even though reporters have kind of dismissed this and said that children are often atypical, that still doesn't protect their families from COVID-19. And I think that even though it's necessary to send children back to school for education, I do think it will have its consequences, and we might have to go into at least another partial lockdown because of this.
Well, Jack, you've actually answered the next question I was going to ask. So I'll ask it now. This is basically three questions that I want to, and I will come back around to you to ask this. But these three questions are obviously, the new restrictions that have come in on our date now about meeting up with 6 people without our house, not within our household, who are not in our household. Obviously, do you think these are actually going to make a change? The second question I want to ask as well is obviously, do you think we are going to go into a second lockdown? And obviously the last one I want to ask as well is, if we do go into a second lockdown, is there anything you would do differently that you now know that might, could be for more just your mental health, or just something that you might change just because, it could be going out and buying toilet roll. I'm not entirely sure, but just something that you might, now obviously being through one lockdown, if the second one did come, is there anything different you would do? So I'm going to come to Tim first.
Yes.
Obviously, the first question, do you think these 6, it's the 6 people outside the household, do you think that's going to stick?
I mean, I think the government has said it'll be around for, until further notice. But I think introducing that rule only shows the cabinet's desperation trying to control the situation. I don't think it'll make much of a difference, no, unfortunately. And I don't think we can have another full-on lockdown. That would finish off the British economy and also tragically finish off people's livelihoods. And I don't want to see that. Furlough's ending in October, so we cannot have heavier restrictions because, if the state is not willing to pay the wages of the people it puts out of a job by introducing restrictions, then it's just not going to work.
Obviously, for you, you haven't been in lockdown. You obviously were
No.
working, but is there anything, let's say, for example, a lockdown did come and you were still working, is there anything you would do differently, now this time around?
Anything I'd do differently if I was in a government position, or anything differently I would?
Well, I guess
personally.
like, let's say the lockdown, is going to be coming in next week. Is there anything that you would change from the last time that that lockdown came in from when you were working, or would you just go about your business as usual?
I'd just go about my business as usual, really.
No, that's an absolute fair point.
Obviously, wear face coverings where required. I keep hand sanitizer in my car at all times. I even have wipes, as antibacterial wipes in my car as well.
I think,
and also get out. And obviously, when you're allowed to, get out and also go on walks through the countryside. Something I've always enjoyed doing. Listen to Mother Nature. Planet Earth. It's a great place. The only habitable planet within 50 light years. So let's take care of it.
Hanniya, I'm going to ask you the same 3 questions again. Obviously, starting with 6 people outside your household. Do you think that's going to stick, or do you think that will change very quickly?
I think it all depends on the numbers, and the fact that they've reintroduced this sort of regulation. I think it will highlight to people, at least to some extent, that the numbers are rising, and that it's not, the situation is not one that we can be completely relaxed about. So if nothing else, I feel like it does help to sort of highlight that. And I am skeptical about it, because even before, people, when we had this rule before, like, people weren't necessarily following it to the best of their abilities. And now, especially, like, having had that sort of taste of freedom, if you will, and having had that period of time where we were essentially not in lockdown at all, now, like, re-implementing it will definitely be harder. But I feel like it is necessary to to re-implement it anyway, just again to highlight that this is true and it's not gone away.
I think.
What was the
Sorry, were you about to say something?
I was just going to say, well, I've forgotten the second question now.
Oh no! Well, the second question, I think you basically just answered it again. Like, do you think there would be a second lockdown?
Yeah, so again, I feel like I agree with Tim. It would be too disastrous to imply like a full lockdown like we were a few months ago, both for the economy and also just for people in general. Like I don't, as a population, I don't think we are um ready for that, or like even willing to accept that in a sense. But I feel like that there will be the need for some regulations, whether that is like the rule of six or anything else. And to learn from last time, it's that open communication. That's something that the government needs to learn, to be open with the communication, be clear on what they're saying, and to restore some of that trust. Because I feel like right now the the public has no faith in our government. Like, yes, they've introduced this rule, but again, like, we're all sitting here questioning it, like, will this help? What's going on?
Is
And
there?
then
Sorry, go on.
and personally, what I'd um, do differently, I think I agree with him. I'd kind of just carry on like I did before, but then what would be different this time is I'd be more mentally prepared for it. And I think we'd all be. So before, when we were going into lockdown, we had no idea like how long and what to expect. And then now, if they do reinstate a lockdown again, we won't know how long, but I feel like having been through it once, we can kind of have that sort of we'll be more mentally prepared for going into lockdown.
I definitely think everybody will be more mentally prepared, because obviously we've all been through it once now, so we're obviously going to be a bit more used to it. I guess the people that might struggle are the people who are obviously furloughed, or maybe have lost their job and then might go back into a lockdown after working for a long time. I'm just concerned about time here, but I am going to come to Jack, of course, and just ask you the same three questions. The 6 people out of the household. Your opinion on that?
Well, as actually referenced to by a minister in the government, actually, it could have been a rule of 4, it could have been a rule of 8. I actually think it's a desperate measure of control by the government, because I do think that COVID is getting out of control again in the UK. At least there have been some reports that the R rate has risen to 1.7. So the rate of infection is rising again. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but what I've seen, at least, the R rate is rising once again, at the very least.
Oh, it definitely is. I've heard of people getting infections, so it definitely is rising. There's no doubt about that.
So I don't think this is a very effective rule I've introduced, because I think there's too many loopholes, so to speak, with workplaces still being open, with schools being open. I think there's plenty of other ways that people can mass gather, excluding social situations. Personally, if I was to do it different, this lockdown, if there was another lockdown, which personally I don't think there will be another complete lockdown, but I think there might be a partial lockdown. So like maybe a complete social lockdown with cafes, restaurants, whatnot being shut. I think this time, I think we will be more prepared, as Hanniya said. We'll be more mentally prepared, because we've all been through this before now. We have more of an idea of what to expect, even if we don't know how long it will last for. So I think we will be more equipped for it. Although,
is there anything?
Time,
sorry, Karen, I'll just say, is there anything? And obviously, the last question I just wanted to ask as well is, is there anything you would do differently?
Yeah, I was just about to come to that. But is anything that I'd personally do differently this time? I guess I'd just be kind to myself, really, because that was something that I neglected initially during lockdown. Like, me being quite a selfless person, I was looking out for my friends more than myself. So I dedicate time to myself more self-love, more. I think I'd kind of like adapt some self-love strategies. So maybe I'd kind of like keep a diary or something for positive kind of like sentiments and whatnot. So yeah, I think I'd focus more on self-love and dedicate time to that as well as supporting my friends.
No, I think that's a real strong one, especially the diary idea, and being selfless. I think, I think obviously that's very important. The idea that looking after oneself is definitely, I think, something very important to consider during lockdown. Obviously, looking after your own mental health before others. In my opinion, I don't think we will go into another lockdown. I think we're more likely going to look at more restrictions, but they aren't going to be a complete lockdown. I think the more likely thing that we will get is perhaps from maybe 11 o'clock to 11 o'clock in the evening to maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Not 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the morning.
That's a long curfew.
I know, I was about to say,
I wouldn't be able to go to work.
5 o'clock in the afternoon, there may be a curfew for that then, preventing people going out and, getting drunk and whatsoever. Obviously, and that's obviously targeting the younger people. But we are going to round this podcast up here. I just want to ask, each of you, and feel free to talk. Is there anything that anyone would like to say or get their final thoughts on anything we've talked about?
Yeah, as I say, it's already as I've already said, we are living in some very challenging and very different times. But I just want to say, if you're ever struggling, do reach out to people. It could be a friend or family member, or if you don't feel like you can talk to any of those, please reach out to a charity or charities like the Samaritans or the Campaign Against Living Miserably or Calm. Two of the greatest charities on the planet, particularly Samaritans. They've helped me on and off for the past 8 years. So yeah, that's all I want to say, really. Reach out if you're struggling. Don't sit in silence and sink.
Hanniya, Jack, anything that either of you would like to add?
Well, personally, I think I definitely agree with what Tim said there. To go hand in hand with that, I think it's important to be kind to yourself and to not take it too harshly if you aren't being as productive as usual. To be nice to yourself and accept the fact that you're taking a break of sorts if you need one. Just remember the environment and remember that it can cause you to be more stressed out than usual, and that it may definitely affect your productivity.
And anything? Sorry, carry on.
I just want to second what both Tim and Jack said, and just again acknowledge that these are, unforeseen times, and no one really knows like how things are going to end up, and that's okay. And like, again, speaking from experience, having that uncertainty is something that like really stresses me out. And if that is someone else, like, just know that, acknowledge that, and know that everyone else is sort of feeling the same way and going through the same thing. And yeah, again, as Jack said, just take time for yourself and really check up on yourself as well as your friends and those around you.
Yeah, I definitely think self-well-being is something that I think we're all really stressing here, and I think that's really important. Well, if there's nothing else that anyone would like to add, I will round this podcast up here. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can obviously go to our website, or go into the links into the description, which will be our Twitter and Instagram, which you can get obviously messages there. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below on what you might want us to discuss on the podcast. Obviously, we might be doing a Q&A at some point, so if you have any questions you'd like us to ask or answer on the podcast, you can obviously leave a comment as well. But other than that, thank you very much for listening or watching, whichever your platform is, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
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 Come on, Tim, I want to buy from you. All right then, I see how it is.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't realize the microphone muted then. Yeah, see you later, guys. Take care.